people show up, especially at the end. So as I said, we're 4 weeks left. So this is actually week 10, but just a reminder, because this term there was the week off for week 8. So today I've kind of merged the legal stuff. So instead of 2 weeks of legal and project delivery, kind of get one, which is good because week 10 was really a lot of, it's good to be compressed. So it's actually better for you all. So it's week 10, but we're covering week 9 and week 10 together. I want to just administratively go through some of the remaining stuff. So I see some of you have put stuff in the discussion. I read some of them earlier or yesterday, and then today's been a really rushed day. I just made it back from George Brown. So these 2 are open today, and then next week is case studies, and then a BIM So there's only 2 left of the discussions, and as I said from the beginning, they're just teasers. So please do. I see them as just easy grades. If you saw that announcement, the quiz, I actually postponed it to this week, because after we hung up last week, I said, yeah, let me open up that quiz. And I saw that there's legal stuff in there. And I said, yeah, okay. So the quiz is, it'll open today after this class, due next week. Do it, do it quickly, I would recommend. As like last time, I hang up, just do the quiz. I think it's only 10 questions, so just get her over with. There's one last quiz, another 10-question one on the 29th. And then I've just alluded to I don't think I've said anything about the final exam, but the final exam is all true false. So it's actually, I think, well, you tell me if it's easy, I guess. But I never had a true false final exam. So I think it's a fun final exam. So that'll be done at some point in the Blitz week, again, at your own time. But just so you're all aware, the last week of the term is actually the week of the Blitz. But our last class is the 6th to accommodate the Blitz. But I put the deadline of the 12th for that exam, so then I can get the marks in on the 13th. Okay, so that's why I do on the 12th, the exam. And then the activities, sorry, the assignments, the active one, I'll take questions at the end. You can ask anything about the assignment if there is anything. This one here is due next week. And then next week, I'll talk about the final group assignment. And as I said, that one's kind of like a culmination of what you've done in these 2, forcing you together into groups, forcing you to talk, forcing you to, take the best of all your solutions, put pride on the table, work together as a group, and then present it as a final with a BIM execution plan. And yeah, so we'll talk about that next week. But that's all that's left, really, which is crazy because this course is almost over. So with that, okay, we got 11. We got to find the other 2/3 of you and just say, come on, man, you got to come to the class and listen to Brent's craziness. So we're going to talk about legal today. And legal, it's fun, it's good stuff. Oops, sorry, lost my power. The reason I do legal, and if you look at the history of what we've talked about, the first 8 weeks, it's all about, what we're BIMing, why we're BIMing it, how to make a plan, how to discover what we have to deliver, why we have to deliver it, how we want to deliver it, setting BIM goals, identifying uses to achieve the goals, picking the right software, the right collaboration solution, putting it all together, diagramming it, rock on week 5 diagram. On a side note, you guys were awesome on those diagrams. At George Brown this morning, their final assignment is basically what you guys did in week 5, but doing it as groups. And they just said, oh my God, how do we do this? Is it even possible? And I kept saying, oh yeah, it's possible. I got a lot of awesome people in Ottawa that just did it, so you guys can do it. They were just looking at me like I was nuts. So I'll let you know what comes out of George Brown, but for me, it's like a competition now between the 2 colleges, and you guys are rocking it. Talked about deliverable requirements and defining the solution. So week 8 was kind of pulling it all together and saying, okay, if you do that, how do you take all of your stuff? We need a bit of Revit, a bit of Bentley. We're going to do some estimating. We're going to do some schedule simulation. We might do machine control. What are the softwares? What are the systems? How do we share it? How do we sell it? And how do we make it all work? So it's all awesome. And then you come to legal. And it's not the downer, but this week is about, well, Brent, if everything is so wonderful, why isn't it always done? And that's what I want to talk about. Why isn't it always done? So, legal. I'm going to describe this presentation. If you look through it, it is rather wordy, so I do apologize for that. It's done by a lawyer, and she always says to, she's a colleague of mine, a side story. We both went to architecture school together at U of T, and she's University of Toronto, and she said she didn't want to be in architecture. So I said to her, why did you go through 5 years of hell if you didn't want to be in architecture? So she went over to Queen's Law in Kingston and focused on construction law. And once she got her degree, I got my license. We said, you know what? So this is Andrea Lee of Glayholt LLP. We said, let's start to teach together. So we go to different, like, Faculty of Law, University of Toronto, Osgoode Hall in York. I've taught at her firm, she's taught at my firm, and it's all about, she'll talk construction law and I'll talk BIM. And then she always says, and it's not fair because my slides look like a lawyer did it, Brent, and your slides look like someone creative did it. And I said, well, that's just how it is. So these are her slides, but I guess it's all about the anecdotes, really, of what we're doing. So when we start this, we look and we say, well, legal is about accountability, okay? So in the world of BIM, everything is just shaken up. Imagine taking all of the history of how we work, putting it in a bag, shaking it and throwing it on the table, saying, now go forward. So I've kept alluding to integrated project delivery. And the concepts, when BIM works really well, it's when all of us can just say, we're gonna share. I'm gonna give you my data, you're gonna give me your data, and I'm gonna use it as a basis and I'm gonna thrive. But it's always, what happens when something's wrong? Who's accountable for the information? Am I liable if you give me data, I do my model, you change your data, I do something to my model, somebody takes your data and assumes something, and it might be based on maybe something wrong I did? Are you accountable? Simple example, if the contractor orders 1,000 cubic meters of concrete because the data from your model said there's 1,000, but you said there's 1,000 because something in my model led you to believe it's a concrete wall, when in reality it was a brick wall, a masonry wall. What does that mean? Who's accountable? So those questions start to come up. And then what happens when the virtual models become my contractual deliverable? And I dream of that. I said that to you guys, I say it to all my students. The fact that I still have to affix my seal to a set of drawings is so disappointing in this world. We can do Adobe digital signature on everything. Why do I have to put that silly seal on drawings? Just this year, the Ontario Association of Architects finally declared that we could use digital seals. Still the symbol of the seal, but it can all be done electronically. So instead of me doing it electronically under the table, I can now do it electronically with permission, but I still have to seal 2D drawings, which is disappointing. But what happens if that BIM, so in the world of Revit, what if I give you the RVT file and that's my deliverable? You can't do that yet today, or nobody's doing that yet today. So in the wonderful world of legal, we've got contracts, contracts, and contracts. This is the Bible. So for fun, of course, here's a contract. We'll go to page view. There we go. So this is in architecture world document 6 by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. And then each province may have their own version of it. And this, and in IBI group, we basically take these standard forms and then we make the standard IBI form. And what that's all about is just adding more particulars and protections. But everything is, a contract is an agreement between two parties. So it's between one person and another. All contracts have to do that. They're binding by law in every single place we practice. I'm showing you Canadian examples because that's the most law I'm comfortable with, but it's the similar anywhere we are. Listing other people, and this is an interesting one. Consultants engaged for the project, either by the architect or by the client. So this might be my structural engineer, mechanical engineer. This might be a surveyor, maybe a, whoa, my brain's failing me. Somebody else by the client. The fee is a fixed or percentage, when I'm to be paid. And this is a very important one because this is all the BIM myths. Oh, we do too much work up front and we don't get paid for it. Well, this controls when we're getting paid. Fix the percentages. And I said, oh, I didn't think of that. Or more likely, well, the client said they're only giving me 10% at 10%, but I did 30% of the work. Okay, well, then you'll get paid later, or you work at risk. It's a decision. You just have to do that, right? All standard stuff about payments, signatures, definitions, and notice how there's no BIM definition. I think that's interesting. And then we've got the conditions. And this is where legal has fun. Now, there's no, in the test, there's no, what was the general clause of law? I don't do that because I wouldn't even, who remembers these things, right? But what's important about this is the architect shall. If I sign this contract, I'm accountable to do this stuff, okay? And if you look at some of the stuff that's here, you know, engage the consultants identified up there. So what does that mean? I need to engage them. Think back to collaboration, right? I, according to this contract, have to make sure we're all collaborating and working together. I've got to perform the services and manage all the communications with the consultants. Imagine doing that by email. Direct fail, you know, thumbs down. And just think about how we did this in the world of, in the past world where things weren't, where things were just more difficult to do, right? It lists out the services, lists out what the client has to do, and that's important as well for disputes, client responsibilities. So the clients are responsible for subsurface conditions, everything about the site. They need to give me the data. Well, what's their data? So remember, BIM, this is all about information. I need information from others, and I am responsible to give information. And this is by contractual law, okay? As the world becomes digital, these clauses all relate to the digital world, right? I have responsibilities about budget, my role during construction. So I might be off the project as a designer, but I still have a role to generally review the work. And I always say, I don't know how I don't know how it's going to come together, but I need to review it. This goes right to LOD. Hey, architect, why don't you want to model the steel connection of the column and the beam? Because our responsibility is beam, column. Not, is it welded, the depth of the weld, are there bolts, how many torques, is it a moment connection? No, that's LOD 350, LOD 400, that's the purview of the contractor, that's not here, okay? And that's why oftentimes we're very rigid about these things, because we don't want to overcommit beyond what we are legally obliged to do. And we don't want to actually take into account others' work. 6.6, if BIM is used, the standard contract published by the Institute of BIM in Canada shall be used. And that's why in the hybrid, I said, have a look at that and fill it out. Because the standard contract is now starting to touch upon the premise of what then becomes the BIM execution plan. And what we've struggled with in a lot of our history is not being in play, and then all of a sudden there's responsibilities that aren't outlined. So here we have definitions, and definitions that start to make sense to us. Is not awesome. Model element author, huge. Okay, LOD huge, BIM huge, but model element author. Who's going to own the pieces of the model? In the world of architecture, that's my bread and butter, right? Who owns the wall? That's a big question. Structural engineer owns concrete? Probably. What about that brick wall, the masonry wall? What if the masonry is reinforced? I had battles over structural engineers over who's responsible for that, who's specifying it, who should model it, who should own it. The model manager, project BIM lead. We talked about that role. Here it is right here in the contract. Imagine not having to fight about the fact that the project needs a project BIM lead. It's right here in black and white, signed by all parties. There will be a manager. I wish they used the term, but I'll take model manager over nothing. That's fine. It's just, this is written by lawyers, remember that. Of course, it's got the conditions, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then it has scope. Where's the model being used? This is the initial start of the BIM goals, authorized uses. So we're going to be modeling for, remember the wheel of BIM, design, creating drawings, clash detection, schedule simulation, cost estimation. If I put it here, we're doing it. If I anticipate it might be used for it, we're aware of it. Okay? And then some of the things, yes and no. Asset management, no. 2 years later, you got a BIM. I want to put in my asset management system. Good for you. Let's scope it out because it's not part of the contract. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying it's in addition to the contract. Okay? And this is a huge thing that does not exist on every single project. And when it doesn't exist, this is where the struggle of our group comes into play, trying to make it happen. So I just leapt ahead. So I'll actually go through the slides now, but yeah, we'll be good. We'll be good. So as I said here, standard form, I was supposed to just show the architecture one here. So there's the national one, there's one in Ontario, and there's one in a couple other provinces. So the provincial ones just take a couple of clauses and adjust them and purpose fit them for some provincial irregularities. Or if you're not familiar with Canadian law, we have the federal government and then the provincial governments all have the authority to implement things that are federally mandated. So an example like healthcare, federal government says, thou shalt have healthcare, period. The provincial government says, this is how we implement it. In our world, the AEC industry, the federal government says, you'll have a building code. And here's a model code. And then the provincial government is responsible to implement the code. So they might take the national building code and say that works. Or like a lot of provinces, we have the Ontario code, there's BC, Alberta, etc. So, clients' responsibilities. They make the information available to us. I am not responsible as a design team to go survey the land. It's not my land. And I'll never get paid to do that as a building design team. Or let me flip that. I could be paid. If I'm designing a building, it's not my responsibility to survey the land. If the client says, man, we don't have a survey, IBI group, can you survey it? We'll say, yeah, we can provide the service to you as a separate contract and not part of design. Or we can say, yeah, we can recommend and help you find a survey which you will procure. So it's just making sure that there's that responsibility. As architects and engineers, I don't want to be responsible for the survey itself. So client engages a specialist and sometimes engages subconsultants. They authorize us to act as their agent. So the client says, yep, design team, take your model, get a permit based. So imagine e-permitting. Yep, do your modeling, get your permitting, pay the fee. I will reimburse. You are my agent. You are acting for me to build on the site. There's a trust level built in there. Trust, wonderful trust. If it was a integrated project delivery, trust would be huge. Consultant's responsibility. Fill out the scope of work. Make sure there's clarity on what we're doing. Am I designing the building? Am I going to model it? What am I sharing? How am I sharing it? What's my deliverable going to be? Project definition and deliverables. I don't want to get sued because somebody says, oh, we're doing BIM. Oh, the fancy world of BIM, all this stuff can happen. And then I sit there and I'm sued by my association and my only response is, but BIM, that doesn't work. That's not a defense, right? BIM, no BIM, CAD, no CAD. Back in the days when my father was using the pencil and the paper. Same, none of this has changed. And like this, I'm stressing this because I've been asked, is all this technology changing the profession and changing how we work? I'll say no. It's enhancing and enriching the quality of what we do. None of this stuff changes. And everything we did back in week 2, right? EIRs, analyze clients' requirements. That's in my contract. So why would I start a BIM project and not have a client requirements document to know what they're doing? If the client has a requirement, build me a 5-story building. All right, can't I ask a little more than that? And I'll ask about programmatic things, this and that, and the BIM stuff. Get it all in there. All right, standard of care. This is a big one here. So the expectation by law is no matter what we're doing, I'm maintaining a standard of care as expected by architects and engineers, BIM or no BIM. So I always tell our professionals, you still got to be an architect, technology or not. So change the medium and the mechanisms upon which we digitize and represent, what's formulated in our heads, but not the responsibility, not the standard of what we have to work towards. If I get sued, I can't say, well, Revit was so complex, I decided that it's not worth making sure the detail of whatever is up to par. Oh, the judge will laugh at me. That'll never happen. So the standard of care has to be maintained. And it's all just by history. We have to achieve and work towards that standard. We don't guarantee success. We don't guarantee price. We don't guarantee that'll work, but we use the standard of care to speak to it. Now, that last line is important. And this is where my colleague and I, when we present it, we laugh because you get asked the question, hey, new BIM coordinator, let me ask you a question. Should we give the model? And you say, well, why the heck not, right? Well, what if I'm liable? And I don't even know what that means. So this is important. Architects and engineers are not liable for breach of contract or negligence if they've exercised reasonable judgment, competence, and diligence. So you want my Revit model? Take it. I'm going to talk about limit of liability in a moment, but take it. I'll tell you what I built it for. Take it, because I've exercised my proper standard of care. Copyright, it's your work. And people talk about this, so who owns the model? Who owns this? It's like, first of all, I want to say, who cares? And second of all, why are you asking? And you get it from, well, I'm the architect. Yeah, you have copyright. You're the architect, you're the engineer, you're the contractor. We all have copyright of the information we author. Plain and simple. Clients can say, well, I want to own the model. Great. When we're done, here's the deliverable. You own your deliverable. I still have copyright of everything I've authored as a professional within this country, period. And you sit in front of anybody who doesn't understand it, you quote me, you phone me and say, Brent, can you make those statements you made in class? And I will make them, because this is horribly misunderstood. I have copyright of my work by law, period. And the deliverable can be owned by whomever. It doesn't matter. It's a deliverable. Of course, the owner owns what they paid for. I also own what I made too. The instruments of service can be used for renovations or future additions. That's what owners mean when they say, can I have it? Do I own the data? Yeah, it's yours. And when you do an addition to your house, what are you going to do? Do the add-on to the drawing. But if you alter my drawings, this is the law. So I give you a drawing of the house, wall to wall. If you alter my drawing that contains my stamp, you need my permission. If you're using my instrument of service to portray the base for an addition, rock on. It's all good. It's just an instrument of service. If I give you my Revit model, it's an instrument of service. Do whatever you want with it. But if you take my stamped contractual deliverable and try to augment it, you're breaking the law, unless I give you permission to. Things we do during pre-design. So think of all the stuff, so from the BIM world. So think of when you go in there and say, man, we can do all this stuff. And you get this, too much, too complex, too much work, not enough budget, not enough time, blah, blah, blah. because we're in the pre-design phase. We're doing stuff like this. Building layouts. This is why things like Grasshopper and Rhino, especially in IBI group, the architects and engineers have leapt towards this. Architects, engineers, urban planners, because you do algorithms, all this stuff happens, boom, I have an output. I said, well, that's easy. We can do that. There's a comfort level because the time to complete is much lower. There's a fear, the BIM myth, right? You open up Revit, oh my God, I don't know what to do because I hit place wall and it's asking me what to place. I don't know what to place. And you say, place generic. Oh yeah, and then, you know, it's all weird. And that's what happens. And then after, oh my God, now we have to change it. Just change the family. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. And that's all the panic. It's like this, it's like peaks and valleys of panic. It's just fun, but it is what it is. These are what we do in pre-design. And these are all defined very well in the 4 phases of delivery. Drawings and specs. Worse, and I say to Andrea, I said to her, you gotta change that, but it's modeling. The BIM output during this phase is my drawings and my specs. If you do it right, I've optimized all of these things. If you do it wrong, you know, I still have to deliver this regardless of my instrument of service. This is what comes out. Then we get into bidding and negotiation. So this is in a typical design bid build project, selecting contractors, information to bidders. And me giving information to bidders is explicitly prescribed by law. So what I mean by that, there's what, 14 of you on? If you're all bidding on my project and one of you come to me and say, hey Brent, can I have that Revit model? And I say, oh yeah, sure, here you go. We just broke the law. Supreme Court of Canada declared you cannot do that. So if you ask me for the Revit model and I say, yeah, sure, let me send it to all 14 of you. And if I don't send it to all 14, I've broken the law from the fairness rule. I can't remember the Ron versus Ron Consulting, Ron Contracting. I can't remember. Very famous case law presented when I was back in school. Supreme Court of Canada just declared you can't do that. So if I did that, all of you that didn't get the Revit model, you would have a right to the project. Or I would have to pay you the fee, and it would just be a nasty situation. So very critical. So when we're building this data, we've got to remember and think about the importance of that data. So you asked me for the Revit model. You're the contractor. I now have 14 contractors. I give 14 of you this Revit model. You all go and say, oh, well, you know what? I want to know how much length of pipe, volume of concrete, and weight of steel is in that model so I can bid. And then you say, I think I've got about $1 million worth of material. You win. And then you discover there's $1.5 million. Do you sue me, the owner? What happened? You're going to sue somebody. You're going to sue your bonding agent. Something's going to happen. And luckily, there's no case law. Like it just hasn't happened yet, which is great. But part of that's because BIM increases the quality of the work, that what I'm describing is extreme case. But if it happened like that, you'd have to be protected. And therefore, you want to do things right to begin with. So just a case law example here. So this one's about how the contractor, what method the contractor chose to accomplish the work, and how the contractor chooses it is to the purview of the contractor. Okay, so we want to make sure here what this said, this case law said was, when I'm turning over the information during bid, I'm not responsible to say how you do it. Again, LOD. When I'm asked, Brent, give me an LOD 400 model, I cringe and say no. The designer cannot outline means and methods of construction. And that's what would come from an LOD 400 model. So an example, back to my steel and column. If I say I will have a bolted connection and there will be 5 bolts and blah, 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 that's what I'm saying. And then you're going to come back and say, nah, we're going to weld it. So then why did I model it to begin with? What's the point? Or worse still, you priced it as a bolt. It gets to the steel fabricator. They say, no, that doesn't work. It needs to be a weld, and a weld is double the price. Then what? Then you're pissed at me, and then you have legal fun, right? Engineers undertook to provide information in the tender package for use by the bidders. Purpose was to allow the bidders to prepare a price, and the engineers knew this. The contractor reasonably relied on the engineer's information, and this caused the builder's loss. The engineer is liable for the damage. So, BIM use. The model will be used for estimation. Explicitly stated and told to the engineer, the contractor relied on the data, the model was wrong, a little more expensive, engineer was liable for damage, okay? But there's critical there. For this to have happened, that part there, where is it? The engineers knew this. That's the critical piece that made the engineers liable. If we're sitting there during design and I give you the model and I explicitly state this was not made for the purpose of preparing a price, and you prepare your price, all good, limit of liability, right? Engineer was liable. I want to limit liability. We'll talk more about that. Construction phase, interpreting the specs, means and methods, LOD 300, LOD 400. Supervision of work, duty to inspect. So the contractor supervises. The designers will only review for general conformity. So when I used to I spent hours upon hours on site to get my license. And I'd hear, oh, the architect's here to inspect. And I'd say, no, I'm not. I am not inspecting your work at all, ever, ever, ever. I'll walk around with my model, preferably a holographic version of it, but more likely today in a tablet. I'll have drawings, I'll look, I'll observe, I'll make notes. Not inspecting. I'm not going to go and see if they're poured it correctly. That's all done by the inspection agencies, not by us. So what happens when the contractor deviates from the deliverables, the plans and specs? So I don't want to read it all, but contractors who take part in design and construction of a building owe a duty in tort to the purchasers of the building. So if it's foreseeable of a failure, reasonable care was taken, the contractor would create the defects, rectify them, and ensure no danger to health and safety. Now, I want to stop here. Duty in tort. If you haven't heard the word tort law is terrible. It's wonderful for everybody else. It's terrible for design professionals and contractors. What that basically says is, I have an expectation to a duty of care, regardless of what's covered in the contract. So the contract's under contract law. My duty of care, different from standard of care, right? In the contract, it says I need to act like an architect. I have to meet the standard that an architect sets, contractual law. Tort law says, hey, since you're an architect, you got a duty of care. And the best example that was used when I was in school was this. You're sitting outside, you're an architect, and your neighbor says to you, hey, can I put a deck over here? And you look and say, yeah, should be fine. Make sure you support it, and you're good. And the guy goes, oh, okay. Goes off to Home Depot, builds a deck. He's sitting on it. He didn't support it well. The base cracks, he falls, somebody breaks a bone or something, and he sues you. And he sues the architect because the architect said, yeah, this should work. Because I'm an architect and under tort law, I have a duty of care. So what I say, the right answer is, well, you should engage a design professional to do a proper design and blah, blah, you just let out the whole spiel. And they look at you, they shake their head and they walk away and that's it. But my cousin once said, they were renovating, hey, Brent, can you come and look at this beam? And I said, no. And the look of evil from my family. There's no way you want me to come and say, yeah, that looks good. Never. Because when that beam breaks, it's me, tort law. So that's something where you just have to be very careful of that, because the other thing about tort law is it pierces the veil of corporate protection. So at IBI Group, I'm protected by the entity because it's the contracts, etc. I've got insurance, all great. But tort law, it's me. This is Brent Mowdy personal. They could sue me, sue my home, sue my assets if I just say things that make no sense. So bringing it back to the BIM world, imagine the same thing. I showed the example of the model of I did for the house design. I could give it to people and say, oh yeah, the data's in there, follow it and you're good. That's terrible. I would never, ever say that because there's a duty of care for the fact that I'm an architect. Same with engineers. Yep, that beam looks right. That beam's not right. Guess what happens? So all this leads to insurance. Of course, you can't and luckily by law, there's insurance. So I get sued. Guess how much I get sued for? What I'm covered for, most likely. So by law, minimum 250,000 every architect. Firms like IBI, liability insurance is higher. So you cover yourself. And basically when something goes wrong, hey, the data was wrong. I used your model to price. I'm now out $50,000, $100,000, $1 million. I'm suing architect, engineer, owner, this, that. Anybody that has insurance, you're going to get sued. We all go to litigation. Somebody's blamed, somebody's partially blamed, et cetera, and a payout happens. End result, somebody probably gets covered. Somebody's premiums probably go up, and somebody has a very upset feeling going forward. Limit of liability is another thing that we want to look at. And the point of that is because, you know, there's a lot of ways that you can claim in contracts saying, hey, we're going to do this stuff, but we're not responsible. And everybody just wants to say, we're not responsible, we're not responsible. So you can't just say that. It has to be rooted in something. So clients want us to have more insurance, and then clients want us to be very clear on what we're doing and what we're not doing. Okay, so I'll talk more about limit of liability in a moment. I pulled up the BIM contract. So I didn't pull up this 201, but the contract appendix exists. And then at the end of the contract appendix, there's actually a table for, where is it in here? There's a table in here for LOD down at the bottom here. Where is it? Okay, I'm not seeing it right now. All right, it's in here, I promise. Oh no, sorry, no. There's a clause, sorry, my brain, that's why I'm not seeing it. There's a clause in that contract that says, go to 201 or an associated level of development matrix. And that goes right back to the BIM execution plan. So I keep saying this contract appendix is critical. Same thing with these two docs in the US. So they both, the doc 301 and the E202, they both outline the process. And that's why I started this course with, back in September, BIM is a process, not a piece of software, okay? So what are you BIMing? Why are you BIMing it? Who's BIMing it? Where are we BIMing it? That answers all those questions. What do we need to deliver, et cetera, et cetera. It all molds into this document and then leads into who's authoring this model, right into your LOD table. Model element table, what are you modeling? Walls, floors, roofs, et cetera. What are you not modeling? I keep using conduits because we've had quite a discussion about conduits on one of our projects. If something is field routed going from a point to a target and I don't care how it gets there, I'm not going to model it. But does somebody else expect me to model it? And then we get into litigation. And conduits is a great one. Is the standard of care that I would model conduits that are, you know, an inch in diameter? I would argue no. A contractor might argue yes. You go to a dispute. You're in dispute and you need a resolution. In the contracts, Andrea here highlighted some key provisions that are interesting. First off, all parties have to prove that they have the appendix as part of their contract. So imagine this. Imagine I, the architect, I put the contract appendix in. I'm all BIM ready. Everybody else doesn't. So that's kind of dumb, right? So I'm ready to do BIM. None of them want to. The contractor, the subcontractor cannot do design unless they're specified. So they're part of the project, but they're not doing my job. So that gets right back to it's ensuring the validity of those prime contracts. I'm the architect with the owner. You're the contractor with the owner. Just because we're BIMing, that doesn't mean suddenly, oh, I need to do LOD 400 because we're BIMing. That's the BIM myth. Just because we're BIMing, I don't do more. Very critical. Each model element author grants a non-exclusive license for everyone else to use my content for the purposes within the project. That's critical. Should I give my Revit model? Absolutely. And that's what this says. Not only will I give you my Revit model, you're going to give me your Revit model and we're going to share. Or better still, work on a proper collaboration solution. You're in BIM 360, WIP environment, and we're just sharing, right? Tell my son sharing is caring, whatever. It's like I got to come and say the same stuff to grown-ups when we're playing on projects. Just share. Everybody sit in the same sandbox, exchange the toys, and share, right? Like, my goodness, end of story. Alterations are at the sole risk of participation of the participants who are making the alterations. So what does that mean? And this is interesting in a design build type arrangement. I'm making my walls. I'm at 30%. You're the contractor and you want to dig a hole and pour. It's my favorite example. And I'm sitting there saying, I'm not ready. Stuff might happen. Walls might turn, whatever. And you say, I'm going to link in your model and I'm going to alter stuff, dig, pour, and declare complete. This is saying that there's a little bit of dialogue that has to happen. If my walls stay this way and you bring them down and you say, you know what, I need to change that a little bit, you better unchange it then. It's your responsibility. Non-payment or breach of contract means revocation or suspension of access to the files. So that way, in the world we live in today, you remove ProjectWise access, you remove BIM 360 access, you cause an immediate panic, and then suddenly the check is in the mail. Wow, access back on. So it's actually kind of cool to be able to do that. If I say we're not using the model for estimating and you want to use it for estimating, it's at your risk. Right? Simple things. That's why the BIM execution plan is so critical. This contract appendix is critical. We have to state the BIM uses. Have to. A waiver of all of us of consequential damages. So what that means is if anything happens that results from us modeling, we're not going to point the fingers at each other and cause problems, which is good. Set out the extent of modeling. So this is section 4, anticipated uses, anticipated, and provisions for record as-built post-construction model use, okay? So anticipated uses means, this is the front end. In theory, well, in practice, this is before your BIM execution plan, and in theory, probably before the BIM lead is assigned to the project. So in IBI group, it's been, hey, Brent, come here, help us fill this project, this contract out. And I'd say, I don't know anything about the contract, the project. Okay, so we try to list things, we try to quickly understand what we can commit to, what we think we're going to commit to, with the clause that it's all going to be refined and cast in stone through a BIM execution plan. But it lays the premise. And then down here, very easily with the owner, are you interested in any of this stuff? And if the answer is no, we're putting no today. And if it becomes yes tomorrow, it's an extra. If it's yes now, we make sure the scope is accounting for it. So these are the minimum requirements. So who are the authors? So this gets right down, who's our team? Understand your LODs. How developed will our content be at our phases, right? So some elements are more important in the world of design. I pick on field routed conduits because they're not. I don't need LOD 300 conduits even at 100% design, but I definitely need LOD 300 walls, doors, roofs, floors, et cetera, right? Know the milestones. Think about the classification system, right? Back to the data. Will there be a classification system? Does the contractor want one? Does it benefit us? Are we going to tie our model to our master specs? And is it using master format? Is it using Uniclass? I would say simple questions, but it's questions. And if nobody knows the answer, could be a problem up front. And the option, this is the example, parties can use either the delivered model element table or one of their own, like we have in BIM execution plans. So some case here, this is where an initial I'll just read. So the contractor is Walsh. They created a BIM based on the architect's 2D plans. The BIM didn't include everything that was on the plans. Then they called for other subcontractors to participate in the BIM process. This subcontractor, NAMI, quickly encountered conditions that were different from those contemplated in the bid. And then they submitted change orders saying, hey, we analyzed your data and we want some changes. And then the prime said, no, we're not going to accept your changes. So it's an interesting process. Let me see. The question here, sorry, I'll pause. When considering LOD, is it considered for a project or the individual building elements? So it's always, level of development is per component, but it's per component and usually in the confines of the contract for what's being delivered. So if it's a design project, it would be for what's being delivered at the temporal moments of the delivery. So in our LOD matrix, we specifically have LOD at 30, 60, 90, at 100, and then at as-built, because you're going to have a different LOD for components depending on the time of your deliverable. I hope that made sense. So in this one here, so I said the general contractor made a BIM. A sub said, nah, I'm not buying it. I see something different. I want to change. Changes were rejected. So what happens? Of course, they go to court and they have a dispute. So they look at their contract, they look at their clauses. The sub is bound to the contractor. So NAMI is bound to Walsh, the same way Walsh is to the owner. And what they're saying is the BIM change order falls inside the scope of the subcontract, and the court agreed. So they failed to prove that the BIM change was, the changes were the result of actual changes as opposed to just what had to actually be done. And that's what's happened with a lot of case law out there. People cry BIM. Oh, your model this, your model that, and then you step back and you say, well, hold up a minute. Are you saying there's a change? Are you saying there's a misunderstanding? Or are you just saying you messed up and you're crying BIM? We have a lot of crying BIM, and it's happening a lot. So this one here was, no, there's, we'll use the change mechanism. We're disputing, there's no change. This is the data as interpreted by the contractor, and this is the data that you need in the sub, and you move forward, and away you go. So the UK, shifting over a little bit, the UK has mandated BIM, and that started back in 2016. And there's a very different approach in the UK that said, you know what, not only do we have case law that we could look at in North America, not only do we have intent, we actually have governance. We don't have that here in North America. So BIM moved from the fringe to be used by everybody. You want to do work on a government project in the UK, you're BIMing it or you're not doing it. And I love their approach, because they proclaim, thou shalt BIM, don't care what software you use, but you shall, and you shall share, and you shall be happy with it. That's all. And they just get over it and they do it. So they're pushing towards standardized BIM use, trying to work with the European BIM Union, the European Union's BIM task force, and a lot of the countries. And it's a phenomenal thing that's happening overseas right now. And we've seen a lot of successes in Australia as well as Singapore in actually achieving a path forward with these. Their BIM standard has now the ISO 19650. So this BS 1192 standard became the international standard for BIM, and it's partly because it doesn't prescribe; it just outlines the protocols. So that's that. When I gave you the BIM execution plans to review, one was a CPIX one under the CIC protocol, the other one was North America. So when people say, oh, the UK is well ahead of North America, not from the ability to BIM, just from the governance of BIM. They're definitely ahead. We're looking on, actually, I'm going to pause here and see how quickly I can pull this up here. In North America, if you're familiar with Building Smart International, we have Building Smart Canada. So Building Smart is the governing agency for open BIM standards. and they're really awesome. I highly recommend you, you get involved where you can. It's all about open BIM, open everything. And if I just hit the BIM roadmap here, if I just remember, view the roadmap. There we go, I got there nice and quick. This is our path to BIM governance. And this was developed by a gentleman, Eric Poirier, who sits on the board of the Building Smart Canada. And it's awesome. I love this document he made in 2014, talking about how to engage, develop, educate, deploy, evaluate, and sustain. So looking at really the life cycle of what a governing process could be, and all of the steps along the way of what has to be governed and done. And you can see developing BIM standards and guidelines, BIM certifications, etc., education within, here, what we're doing today. Do you know how amazing this course is? And I really have a passion for not just what we're learning today, which is legal, but our entire course, and then all of the courses you're getting this term and next term. That's infusing into academia what we need to build governance as a nation. Imagine when you guys graduate, wherever you end up working, if you want to get involved in what it means to, influence government and make a change, this what we're doing now is a part of it. The UK has been talking about this for a very, very long time. And in fact, when I worked in London, I had the pleasure of working on the Olympics, and through the Olympics, what was called the Developing Committee for the Avanti Standards, which became the British Standard of BIM. And it was all talking about what do we mean by WIP, shared and published, and how do we share content, how do we ensure interoperability and build protocols to allow stuff to happen. And it was beautiful seeing all of that come to fruition. So last in this part of the presentation, limits of liability. With everything I just said, all of this stuff before, the question then is, so how do we alleviate fear? Because that's what it all is. And this document, I'll just pop it open here. This document is what we've developed in IBI Group. And I remember Glayholt said to us, yeah, that's pretty damn good, Brent. What we basically say is for any digital turnover, anyone, this goes with it. And sometimes the client says, well, what is this crap? You're contracted to do my work. And I say, our response is very simple. Yes, we are. And we will give you the contractual deliverables. That's all governed by the contract. Drawings and specs, you got it. You want my BIM? You sign this, plain and simple. And that's just to protect me against that standard of care. If I give the person I'm contracted to my model, there's an expectation that, well, this is the architect, this is what they've done. I see their drawings, I see their spec, I see their beautiful portfolio. I have all these expectations for this digital data. Or outside of my contract, I give it to you, a contractor, a developer, the general public, the condo corporation. Let's say if you live in a condo, the committee that runs the condo, they want to have the Revit model so they can do some visualizations about how to evac in case of a fire alarm. So then imagine, there's a fire alarm and somebody pulls up that digital representation of how to get out of the building and they go to do it. Oh, but shit, that model doesn't represent what was actually built and I'm now in a dead end and I get smoke inhalation, I almost die, blah, blah, blah. I gotta sue somebody. Where'd that model come from? That architect. Tort law, duty of care, sue the architect. That's the world. Sucks, but that's the world. So this here, you want my stuff? I give you my stuff. So between me, the giver, you, the taker, this is the project I'm giving it to you about. So that's another thing. Project building 1, project 1, building 1. And you go to use it on project 2, building 1. No, those are different projects, different sites, different this, different that. I give you a building that works awesome here in Toronto and you go and use it down in the Amazon. Could have some issues with moisture and different temperatures and stuff like that. Or worse, vice versa. You do something from Florida, awesome design, you come and drop it up in northern Canada. Could have a problem. So that's important. The BIM model is provided to the recipient solely for the following project purposes. This is the most important thing in the world. And I can't stress that enough. And when I see this not filled out, I cry. And most often, that's all I'm going to check for you because it saves me. I may have the best model ever, but I'm giving it to you as background information. And then you say to me, well, I want to use it for clashes. Okay, do it. I want to use it for costing. Have fun. But if we agree up front in the contract that the digital information will be used for costing, then you would force me to write it here and I would have to write it here because that was the intent. If my BIM use never stated cost estimation, I'm going to give you digital information and not say that's what it's used for. But in the real world, outside of the bounds of legal rubbish, I give you the digital data, you're going to use it for whatever you want. You're going to take the power of the data. That's what's going to happen. This is just saying, you're not going to sue me if you go to that data, click on a component and say, why doesn't this parameter have this and why? Stop. Contractual deliverable, model to make that deliverable, BIM execution plan stating what I was doing, limit of liability saying, hey, remember, this is all I did with it. Done. That's the world of limited liability. And it all goes back to contract law, tort law, what I'm insured for, regions of responsibility. Okay? And it's the terrible way to live the world, but that's where we are today. Okay? Talks about rights retention, risks, so risks that you're assuming as the recipient. If you want to do things that we haven't declared it's to be done, do it, but you take the risk. The BIM does not represent or confirm specific project elements, blah, 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 fire safety, these, all these items. Limiting liability. The recipient is accepting the risk because they want the digital data, okay? And when some clients see this, they just shake their head and it's like, no, this is the world. Sign it or no digital data. Say that to the contractor, sign it or you ain't getting it. They'll sign it, they'll take it, and they'll know they have to adapt it. Now, I'm painting a very, very, very terrible world. And I know that. I know I'm doing that. So I'm going to leap through some of these from what would have been the original week 10. But first I dwell on this. I paint the terrible world because often we are in this guy right there. Design, no, sorry. Let's try that again. This guy right here. Design, bid, build. That's the world. I am very, very happy to say that that's lowering. 20 years ago, almost every project, design, build was new and weird and different. It's like, okay, whatever. That world of the client owner is my person and the contractor's person, and there's this implied dialogue between architect and contractor. My contract said, you know, Brent, you got to go observe. That's all I got to do. I guess I can go observe. And I'm doing that at the behest of the owner. In the design builds, I think I showed this briefly. I can't remember if it's you guys or to George Brown. I've never seen an architect-led design build. I think that's fictitious. This diagram all comes from the Handbook of Practice for Architecture. But definitely seen this guy here, where the designer builder is the contractor. I've had the pleasure of working through those. And I've seen this one too, where the architect and the contractor are actually hired by a separate design build entity. So that's kind of cool. The benefit of design build is a lot of that architect contractor dialogue is mitigated. I'm giving you the data. I'm giving you my deliverables. The contractor is the recipient of my contractual deliverables. But everything I talked about with contract law and tort law still applies. The contractor must have the proper purpose fit expectations. I need to be clear with the contractor in the design build world. What am I doing as architect? What are they doing as engineer? Therefore, as a contractor, I can properly plan for what I have to do as a contractor. okay? And that's critical. I'll go back to conduits. If I want to model all the conduits and I know the electrical engineer is not going to do it, nobody on the design team is going to do it, that has to be built in the price of the contractor. Again, it's all about money, unfortunately, but it goes right back to scope, schedule, budget. Down here is what we want, an integrated project delivery. Right now, there is now a CCDC, Canadian Construction Document Corporation, maybe. There is a CCDC form for IDC, for IPD, sorry, Integrated Project Delivery. And the concept of it is no risk, no barriers, no contractual walls. Okay, we're all together. We're all signing the same contract. We're all going to put money into the project. So we have cost. We'll all be recuperated. So my raw salary, my expenses will be recuperated, as will all of yours. Then if the project makes money, we have an agreed upon split of profit. If the project loses money, we have agreed upon split of loss. Plain and simple. And it's nobody's fault. And that's a beautiful world. So everything I talked about risk and insurance and this and that, in the world of IPD, we've all come together. We've put all that aside and we're trying to do a good project. Those work really well. I honestly don't know why it's just not the common practice everywhere across the globe. In Australia, it's called an alliance project, and I worked on those, my goodness, like a decade ago now, maybe like 2010, 2011, and they were great. You go to a design meeting, and at the table is owner, contractor, architect, engineers. And we just work. And it was awesome. That's how it was. So, yeah, it was just how it should be. That's all I got to say about that. The other thing, so this part of the presentation, maybe I'll just pause. Any questions or comments before I keep on going? I hope it wasn't too dry. It definitely wasn't a picturesque compared to what I've done for the previous 9 weeks, but it's important. And again, like the purpose of that is just to understand you're learning a whole host of awesome things. The legal shroud around the AEC industry, I don't want you to go away and say, all right, look, it's a hindrance, but it does bring challenges that we just have to be cognizant of, okay? If you're not an architect or an engineer, you won't be aware of all the particulars. Just know that we're bound by provincial statutes and laws. And yeah, tort law is one of those things that not many people fully understand. But when I was in school, we had professional practice courses, and I think tort law was mentioned every day. It's just to get people to understand you can't just go and nonchalantly say stuff. I am accountable for every single word I say as an architect, okay? Project management. Have you heard me say scope, schedule, budget? That's the other thing I say a lot. And whenever I walk in, even my staff, they'll hear me on calls and they'll go, oh yeah, Brent, you said scope, schedule, budget 5 times. Well, yeah, because it needs to resonate. So this hopefully you've seen on LinkedIn, so I won't dwell on it, but isn't that just the way of the world, right? So this, for me, people show it for different reasons. This is digital data all gone wrong, communication all gone wrong. Here, it's scope, schedule, budget, all completely misunderstood. So, I'll just blitz it. This is a long presentation, but I'm just gonna blitz through some of these. It's uploaded to the site, so by all means, feel free. This is an internal presentation that we give to everybody. Actually, it's fundamentals of project management. But these are the things, and think in the world of BIM. I think we've talked about all of these things. It's all done digitally without the right collaboration environments, clear communication, planning, planning, collaboration, client needs was week 2, knowing what we're doing, right? I love this, and I always, our VP who built this, I always give him kudos when I present it. So we do this to say project managers don't know how to hit a home run. We develop our business sign a contract, right? BIM execution contract, BIM appendix as well. And that's what I always jump in there and say, don't forget the technology. Then we do the work. And what we say is you stop and you fail right there. Because you got to go back to your client and say, pay me, pay me, pay me. If you don't pay me, I'm going to sue you. And the fear, oh, we can't do that. If I go to the client and say that, they won't give me more work. It's like, well, hold on a minute. We don't want more work if they won't pay. So that last third base to home plate is an important one. But this, you can see, like, BIM is riddled in all of this. Okay, and that's why I show this. The other thing is a risk assessment. Just this morning, I was talking to them, to the George Brown students, and just today we covered, we did software last week and collaboration this week. And I kept saying, what kind of a risk is it if you say we're all going to work together, but we're not going to have a mechanism to share? So that's why for you, week 5 was so important. We have all this technology, all of these tools, all of these systems. We need to have the ability to share. If we can't share, that's a risk. If you can't say, what are we working on and where are we working, that's a risk. If you decide to change the parameters of the project and say, now I'm going to ask so-and-so from Australia to work on my project sitting in Toronto, and you don't see as a manager that that might be a risk, that's scary. So what do? We brush it under the rug. I've heard one manager in one of our offices said, I heard him say, shh, don't tell Mr. Mowdy. And I was in the other room and I said, what do you mean don't tell me? Oh, I didn't know you were in the office. Well, okay, that doesn't justify what you said, but don't tell Mr. Mowdy. Let's do the bad thing. And I was, yeah. Anyway, that's my world. It's fun. I do enjoy it. So to mitigate risks, some ways to do it: select projects and clients carefully, set realistic expectations, BIM goals, set them. And that's where all of those BIM myths from week 1, unrealistic expectations will kill your project. Okay, have a contract. What are we BIMming? Why are we BIMming it? Who's BIMming it? Who are the parties? Who owns the models? How are we sharing? Blah, blah, blah. Broken record, right? Whenever I see them do this, I say, you got to do it from the BIM perspective. Refuse to accept unlimited liability. Refuse. Because 2 seconds ago, I showed you this is how you limit your liability. There are some clients that want you to sign unlimited liability. And the answer is just no. We just will not do it. Okay? Never accept risk you can't quantify or have quantified for you. So very, very important stuff. Okay, a few points that potentially will put a project offside. Make sure the right people are signing and aware. Build a budget with the right staff, the right skills. So think about the software selection. Without the right software, we'll never have the right skills and capabilities, okay? So the right software, the right mix, all that comes together when you're defining the deliverables. So we just went through this, and we're doing a lot of work sitting with this Hurontario project. There's a requirement for a Bentley deliverable. There's a requirement to use open roads. And we have a bunch of, so Bentley open roads, and we have a bunch of staff that are Civil 3D capable. So immediately we said, okay, we've got to plan this, we've got to train, we've got to ensure the skill set is right, and we have to have the right workflows to get the data ready to deliver, right? And it's all working with the project manager, understanding the schedule, understanding who's on the project, making sure they're all trainable and that they're all just rocking, okay? So there was a lot to that that had to be fixed. People are important, right? Budget, important. And then making sure communication is happening. So from a BIM lead's perspective, you're kind of the right hand to the project manager, focusing on technological accountability. So making sure that's happening right. And then understanding what out of scope work is and when to do it, when not to do it. Okay. What time do I got? Okay, I can go a little bit more here. So what we in project manage, so in IBI group, our model is we develop the business, we initiate, we plan, execute, and close. And it's very common across everywhere. My struggle is making sure that the BIM process is accounted for beyond just right here in execution. That's the worst part, is when all this happens and then suddenly, oh, I need Revit. What do you mean? What are you doing? What's that? And then everything we've done in the last 8 weeks never happened. So all of a sudden it's a crash course. Are there client requirements, skills, this, that, and it all just happens. So at the minimum, I'm saying in the planning phase, how about when we're trying to win the work? And this has been a struggle in the industry, because you'll hear, well, it's not our project, we're trying to win. So do I really want to model correctly and have the right standards and this and that when there's a chance we lose? But then once we win, uh-oh, now I've got all this crap data. How do I make it right? So there's a lot to be thought about there. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on these. I'll just pull them up here so you can see. So a lot of the process here is about things that you do to actually decide how to proceed and negotiate. So a lot of this stuff in the business development, this will be unique depending on what firm you go to, but it's about, do we want to pursue, do we want to take the opportunity to have that project and win it? And part of that should be assessing risk. And part of that should be, is there a technological requirement that we can or cannot meet? And often that is just simply not asked at that point. And then once we get beyond that, this contract negotiation, everything I just talked about, if the BIM leads have not been involved at this point, what do? We're already shooting ourselves in the foot before we start the project. And then we perform and deliver. So these pieces are very, very important right from the onset. Okay. I'm going to skip over because there's, again, I want to be cognizant of time here. Some of this stuff is just IBI specific. So here we're talking about how to market. So it gets into the specifics of everything I was just showing in that list. Thinking about contracts types is very important too. So this comes up a lot, and I don't know if you're familiar with a lump sum versus a cost plus. A lump sum contract is basically that. We're going to win work, so we're going to deliver a project, and we're going to get paid $5 million, period. So what do they want to do? Try to do it as efficiently as possible so you're not wasting money, because it's all bottom line after that. Cost plus is guaranteeing that we'll deliver for a certain minimal amount, and then that's it. So we guarantee a max price of our work based on often unpredictable scope. Earned value versus variance versus effort, a couple of budget terms, but just to think about, this is revenue, the money we make. This is, were we above budget or below budget? So positive or negative. And then this is the time it took to earn that value. Okay, simple things. You're going to be asked as a BIM coordinator, how expensive are you going to be to my project? And that's always, what questions I say, look, we should just be ingrained in. I turn it back, how expensive are you, Mr. Project Manager? And you got an evil scowl. So like, okay, maybe I won't ask it that way. But, a couple hours a week, a day a week, how extensive is the project? They'll ask about your involvement. How many digital deliverables are there? Are you managing clashes, mitigating the resolution of them? Are you getting outputs to the contractor weekly, daily, hourly? Hopefully it's not hourly. Sometimes it's crazy. And then lessons learned. What worked and what didn't, right? Big, big question. You should ask the question. And then once we initiate the project, we talked about the contract. They're going to get a contract, have the objectives, sign it off, and then you wait for that reply. Holdbacks are just a government prescribed, oh my God, my brain just failed. Financial obligation, legal requirement. So I'm going to pay you to do work. I'm going to hold back 10%. Simple. Once the work is completed, you'll get the holdback. If the work's not completed, it's there as a contingency. It's there for me to use for defects if you walk, things like that. So just, you know, it's not, there's not a lot you have to know about holdback unless you're involved in heavy contracting. Project planning, initiation, project charter, initial kickoff meetings. Those better be riddled with BIM stuff. You got to be in there or people don't know what they're doing. Chartering the project, scope and objectives. We're doing a major project with Ford right now, and we're in here right now trying to objectify what we're planning to do, what the scope of our technological solution is. We know there's asset management, we know there's things they want, and we'll work to achieve it. Sign a charter, have a kickoff, etc. Communication is critical. We must communicate in order to achieve, okay? And that's why for me, I'm forcing you all to present the last class. It's all about communication. I've got some very shy BIM coordinators in my team. You know, they didn't go through a Brent course. And what do I do to them? I force them to talk. I make them stand up in front of our team and tell me a story, tell me a lesson learned, tell me something, a positive, a negative. How did you shepherd your team? How did you, whatever. We need the dialogue. We need comfort in communication, because without communication, we will just fail. I think in week 13, I do a quick communication thing as well, because it is so important. It's opposed to throwing just more stuff at you. Who's communicating to whom? Huge. And this is part, I can't remember which section in the BXP template, the communication chart. Who? Got to know what those channels and lines of communication are. Then we execute the work. Stages, design development, schematic, design development, construction documentation, tendering, contract administration, etc. In all of those, right back to the legal portion, I've got responsibilities as a professional, as do all the other sealing professionals, as does everybody as a whole. And if it's design bid build versus integrated project delivery, things will all whirl around and be a little different. But there's always responsibility, and there's always ways to make it happen. We perform the work, we execute, and that includes invoicing, resolving issues being potentially clashes, peer review, design review of models, doc review, we make our drawings, we make our schedules, we make our specs out of the model. They all should be synergized together. They all should be in a collaboration system accessible to everyone via the cloud, so we can quality control, communicate to the client, and distribute easily through links to our secured content. Everything week 1 to 8 is right there. Everything. Okay? Except for invoicing, but you get what I'm saying. It's all there. Scope, schedule, budget, that's all I've said over and over and over and over. And I described the triangle, so the concept of that is scope, schedule, budget has to be in alignment. If I increase budget and I keep increasing it till that vertex explodes, I have destroyed the triangle. So if you increase one, you need to increase the other. We want to keep it equilateral, so you should increase them all. What happens? Oh, just do this for me. Just do a little more, just a little more, just a little more. And all of a sudden, oh, now I'm doing an all-nighter. I don't have time. I can't deliver. Okay, we'll give you a day. Oh, okay, great, but I have no one to do it. They all went home because it's Friday. What do I do? And there's your problem. Should never happen. So I always say, what's the scope, schedule, budget? When did and I just ask, I make the team ask these questions to be as annoying as possible until they get their answers. Very, very, very critical. And then we just have to continually monitor. So when I'm running these projects, I'm asking, how's it going? We've got dashboards here. I'll just quickly show you this because it's kind of cool. This is an IBI created one. No, finance dashboard. Open. All right. So at any moment, I can look at this eventually. 1 second. This is Power BI. Power BI is my best friend. I love it. So I can look at the details of all of the projects that I'm accounted for. I talk too fast, apparently. Okay, all of the projects that I'm accounted for, and I can on here see, very quickly, what's our revenue, what's our billings, what have we collect? I still have an outstanding receivable. I have a positive budget variance, so that's like kudos to the team. I can see when tasks are delivered, and all this data is here. And I look at it very regularly, and I feed back to the team. So this outstanding, I'll go and ask, how are we on the collection? That third place to home plate. Are we going to get paid soon for this, etc.? And I can track the tasks. It's very, very important to have a comfort around tracking your own tasks and your own work and seeing how you're doing. Yeah, well, where are you on schedule? Where are you on budget? And what has been accomplished? Okay. Back at CH2M Hill, when I worked there, they would ask us for weekly, what they called the EAC, estimates at completion. So basically they would come around and say, Brent, your BIM task, how complete are you? And I'd say, well, we're at about 70% design. I think we're about 70% complete. They'd say, okay, well, you're 90% spent. All right, that's bad. We would try to fix that, right? So, or the flip side, oh, you're only 50% spent and you think you're 70% complete. That's great. So those are important things to ask and to analyze. So monitoring your performance, and this is with everything, your BIM goals, the tasks and scope, the resources required to achieve those goals, it's all here. No different whether this is general project management of BIM information, it just doesn't matter. So it's all good. This just talks about scope, about these, so I'm not going to get into details of these. Risk management is very important though. So risks can be seen in many different ways. So think about it from the perspective of BIM and all of the risks when you try to implement a BIM use, when you try to make a promise and then you're accountable to achieve it. And what is that risk of lack of delivery? Is an important question, okay? Simpler risk, BIM 360. What is the risk when the Autodesk cloud goes down, right? Now, I don't know if you recall, September 2017, when Autodesk Revit cloud sharing went down from 6 a.m. Eastern to 1 p.m. Eastern. That is a nasty amount of time. It has never done that since, which is awesome. That's like 2 years of stability, but it was down for 7 whole hours. What's the risk? Well, there's a financial risk. There's a cultural risk. People were swearing at me thinking, Brent, your cloud thing broke. I'm like, yeah, I don't own BIM 360, but yep. So think about the risks. Modifications to the contract, you'll usually won't be privy to them, but just be aware that on site, usually during construction, these happen. But it's interesting on a design build project. I'm sitting there in the office playing with my model, and there was a change directive. This is the most impactful one. A change directive. So an example, laying out the building, they're cutting the hole, and they discover a higher water table or a gas line they weren't aware of. So instead of the wall going like this, let's use the gas line. They say, well, you know what? Down at the bottom, the wall has to shift in. Whatever, it's going to go like that. Change directive. We have a moment to do it before it starts snowing. The trucks are right there on the street. Concrete's in there waiting to pour, and the directive is do it. That is a contractual change forced immediately. Deal with the ramifications later. That's a change directive. So now suddenly the wall does that. Great. Gets communicated, this change has just occurred. And now we have to rectify it and fix it. So it happens. You work, especially on design build, you work through it. But that's an example where all of a sudden now, maybe the premise, maybe we're at 90% design. And all of a sudden the building's going to do this underground at 90%. And all the program we had in that lower level has just gotten shrunken. There's a cost ramification to that. The biggest fault would be when an architect would say, Don't worry, we got this. And off they go for, all-nighters for 4 days trying to fix something, as opposed to saying, hold on, this is the scope of that change directive. I know we have to do it. You must pay. And that's a massive difference in mentality that we have to keep pressing forward on. You can see I hit a bunch of these because they go on and on and on. So that's actually cool. And then project closure. Make sure you get paid, first of all. Make sure the client, make sure your project manager knows all of your efforts from a technology perspective. Make sure, and I don't think it's listed here, make sure everybody's aware of digital turnover, right? Limit of liability statements, how to actually close up that final deliverable so that we get our pay. And yeah, that's project delivery. Now I hit all of these case studies. So that's everything I wanted to show you. Let me just see if there's anything else I had unhidden here. No, that's it. So, again, I was going to close just coming back to this, right? Everything I've talked about in this, what would have been 2 weeks stretched out a little slower, comes back to this piece right here. Make order from chaos. That's our role. Okay, that's what we have to do. Understand the legal, the project delivery, understand the potential reservations that are there, and just go through the process that we've achieved. Go through everything we've just done, and the result will be success. I've been doing this for 2 decades, right? They've sent me all over the world. The BIM process is the BIM process. It doesn't matter where you are. The concerns are all the same, okay? Different laws, different countries. At the end of the day, it's all the same, okay? So, take everything I've said in stride. Think about think about the ramifications of the stuff that we do. When we have contracts, we have BIM execution plans, we have appendices for a reason. This LOD matrix is very important. Understand what the deliverables are, know your experts, rely on what you did in the past, build up your experience, and reach out. And for me, it's, and I think I showed this in week 1, just a reminder of what this concept is. We're bringing data out into the digital world. That's the world we're in today. My son laughed the first time I told him, hey, look, this is a mouse. You use it to manipulate the computer. He was there touching the laptop, trying to figure out why it wasn't responding, not understanding that. My daughter's in high school. If I said to her, put it on the C drive, I don't think she'd know what that means, because they're ingrained. It's all cloud hosted. They're all Google empowered. I said to her, I'm going to install Microsoft Office on her laptop. And she said, why? What is that? And I was like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? What is that? No more hair to pull out. And she goes, what? I just use Docs. I just go there. There's my stuff. I can use it on my phone. And I said, well, yep. Okay. So you completely get the cloud. That's awesome. I had to explain to her what Word, Excel, and PowerPoint were, which was, never thought I would do that. But that's the world. These people are coming into our environment expecting this connectivity, and our industry is leaping forward, or it will take a massive leap. So this concept, everything we talk about BIM authorship, we got to get out of that tied world of bound by software barriers, et cetera, and into this world of data harnessing, data exploration, data analytics, the power of Power BI. You give me a data source and I'll make it dance for you, because that's what information is. That's where we are. And with that, I know I don't give you guys breaks, but it's so that we could finish earlier. So I think that's cool. Any comments or questions about the legal or this project delivery stuff? Or about the assignment? Everybody's quiet. That's cool. That's cool. You are an awesome group of people, I just got to say. And I can't wait to see the next assignment. So hopefully it's easier because it's just one diagram. But yeah, so as I said, the next, so we're going to leap over, We kind of just did week 10, 9 and 10 combined. So we're in week 11 next week. I'm going to talk about some case studies. And I believe I open up the final presentation. So I want to talk about that. I just want to check the deadline for the assignment, because what happened a couple of years ago, nobody showed up for a class once because the assignment was due at 3 p.m. and the class started at 1. So I just want to make sure I was smart and I changed that. So I want to make sure the assignment's due at 1. Yeah, okay, there we go. See, I missed, oh, that was the off week, yeah. So due at 1 so that there's no reason to not come and jam at 1 o'clock, right? And then, so what I'll do is I'll do the presentation on the case studies, and really that's just kind of like a cross-section of some IBI stuff in the past, some CH2M stuff that I've done, just to kind of show BIM in action. Some of it is obvious, like simple buildings, and some of it are those complex transit projects and water projects. Basically like project number 2 and 3 from week 5 assignment, where you're probably saying, Brent, this is rubbish. There's no projects that are like this. Oh, there's projects. There's stuff like that, I promise. Yeah, we'll go from there. So I don't see any questions. So thank you, everybody. And we'll talk next week. Have a good weekend. Do the quiz. Do the quiz. Do the assignment. Do the quiz right now. You have 30 minutes. Take it easy, everybody.